A little bit.
Okay.
It felt very cool when I came
She's
in.
cool. I'm hot.
Oh,
I'm always cool. Is it? I'm in menopause. I'm burning up. I might have a fever. It's hot in here.
so
My flesh.
the calendar needs second Monday or Tuesday.
Can I get
a
a
talk to the the election?
Peter's on. Come on. Let's just be
On the
done with
second,
this.
they have to
You're
meet
so
on
dramatic. Bodies
Oh,
are
can I
so
be
dramatic.
to the Zoom? 15th or the 16th. Our meeting's on the 8th. So this is where the.
Oh, yeah, it's
Putting that on.
Well,
And now we have a special meeting to see them, but that's why this is here.
All right, we're gonna get started, everybody. So, good evening and welcome to the September 13th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order and entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second. Moved by Benkin, seconded by Colton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Director Benkin, will you please read our purpose statement?
The Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential.
Thank you. And we will move to our first discussion item for the evening, which is our COVID-19 update. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Arnold.
Sure. I'm gonna pull, yep, I got the presentation up there. Our first slide starts with an overview of our Story County data. And you may have noticed, those of you who follow our dashboard, that we've started to use the CDC numbers as those are updated a bit more frequently than the IDPH numbers. As IDPH has transitioned their data sharing to their dashboard, they do a dashboard 3 times a week, but the detailed data is only updated once per week. And that detailed data is where I source the numbers to do the calculations for the graphs that you see below. Using either methodology, doesn't matter if you're looking at IDPH or CDC, we do remain in a high level of community transmission. Most specifically, the most recent CDC numbers at this time are 151.36 total new cases per 100,000 persons in the past 7 days, and our 7-day positivity of 9.08, which you can see on the slide. Also, we have seen about a 2% increase in vaccination percentages in Story County since our last meeting. Currently, 54.4% of Story County residents are fully vaccinated, and an additional 4.4% are partially vaccinated. When you narrow that down to the population eligible for vaccination, those 12 and up, 61.1% are fully vaccinated, and an additional 4.8% are partially vaccinated. We did have that most recent vaccination clinic on August 24th, and we did have 6 people that took advantage of that. Our next slide includes our student and staff data. And see that this looks a little different this year. I'm trying to see different things that are going to be a better way to present that information in a clear manner. Due to previously communicated changes in guidance by the IDPH, we are not recommending, or we're not allowed to require quarantine for individuals who are exposed. And so self-quarantine numbers aren't really going to be an accurate reflection to present for the board in this percent as a representation of the data. So I'm not reporting those at this time. We do continue to identify close contacts of positive cases in the pre-K through 6th grade population. However, without consistent and correct mask wearing by all, we're required to define close contacts as those within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes because the CDC's rules on 3 feet require consistent and correct mask wearing. So that's the distinction that we see this year. At the time the report was prepared, we have 9 students and 5 staff members who are currently positive for COVID-19. We've had a total of 20 total students positive and 9 staff who have been identified as positive since the beginning of the school year. And this is looking specifically from August 25th on. If there was someone who was diagnosed earlier and may have missed a day of school, they weren't included in those numbers. In analyzing that data, 65% of our positive cases in students are in the pre-K through elementary. And there's many reasons that could be occurring. Primarily, that is the population that cannot get vaccinated. along with a concern that we may have some under-testing and asymptomatic cases that are occurring in our secondary schools that we just aren't identifying. And those, because we are looking primarily at parental report as being our sole way that we are able to know about cases. As far as our staff, 89% of the positive cases in staff are in the PK through elementary, and 56% of those staff positive have been breakthrough cases in fully vaccinated staff. So we are seeing still that split. So far, we've not had anyone very seriously ill, but those are the cases that we have identified. On the next slide, you'll see a little more information about our Test Iowa kits. As of today, those are out and rolled out into the buildings as well as available here at the district office. Communication was sent out to all parents and staff today about the ability to access those tests. The Test Iowa kits are free saliva-based PCR tests where you go, you activate it on testiowa.com, collect your sample, and then it's sent via UPS through a prepaid slip to the state hygienic lab. So there is no cost to access a test or to send that test. Again, available through the nurses at the schools or through here, through the district office, through me. And for any students that are going to be using the tests or parents who are picking them up, we require parental consent for any test that's going to be used in a student. And that has to be completed at the test pickup. The results are emailed about 24 hours after the kit is received by the lab. We don't have control over that. That's resulted when the state hygienic lab can. And also asking specifically if families only are requesting test kits if they're planning on immediately using them. If people want to have test kits to keep because they may be planning a trip or they want to take it in a week or so, we really recommend that they go directly through testiowa.com. Those tests that you can request, you request up to 5 that can be sent directly to your house. They arrive within 2 days. I tested it myself last week. I ordered 5 on Thursday, had them Saturday afternoon. So that turnaround time does seem to be holding. The final topic I wanted to share is not, there isn't a slide for because it's something that happened later today, was about the federal court in Iowa granting a motion for a temporary restraining order blocking enforcement of the state's ban on mask mandates in schools. As you're all aware, House File 847 was enacted in May 2021 and prohibited school districts in Iowa from requiring students and employees in buildings to wear masks to protect against COVID-19. The one area where we still have required masks this school year is on school buses, which is required under federal order. And just as we have shared and discussed at our previous meetings, the American Academy of Pediatrics and CDC both do recommend universal indoor masking for students, staff, visitors, and students in the K-12 schools, regardless of vaccination status, as part of other layered prevention strategies that we've previously discussed. So here ends my report. Can I answer any questions? Yes.
Yes, perhaps this is more procedural for our superintendent. How soon can we schedule a board vote on a mask mandate?
Now, will that board secretary help us out? We have to provide 24 hours notice of a board meeting. So the soonest would be posting tomorrow and could have action or consideration the day following.
Great.
I'd say practically speaking, probably noon on Wednesday would, by the time we got the meeting up, get the meeting posted and everything, so.
Okay. Well, I'd like to suggest that we go ahead and post a meeting agenda.
I would be in support of that as well.
I would just like to be clear, because I guess what I think the procedure would be for us to have a conversation. So it would be a special meeting around that particular topic, not a meeting about a particular outcome, right?
It would be, yes, we would have a topic with an action item on it because since we aren't able to take any action tonight because it was not on the agenda.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I have a different question, but also for Paula. I think I know the answer, but I just wanted to double check. With the Biden administration's rules for businesses and, well, any business that has federal government funding having to do vaccinations. Does that apply in any way to school districts that receive federal funding?
I'm going to suggest that I will get back to you for sure. At this point in time, we don't think it does, but we're actually in a meeting as area superintendents tomorrow morning with legal counsel to discuss that very item.
Okay, that might be another thing just to fill us in on the agenda, or that could be an email update really, since it's an area superintendency.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Dr. Arnold, could I ask one more question? So as far as you know, the order that came out today is related to mask mandates, but not, is it your sense that that changes anything around the quarantine rules?
No,
Okay.
no. It appears that that just is specifically to House File 847, not anything that has been recommended or required by DPH.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the board, from the board for Dr. Arnold?
I don't know if it's for Dr. Arnold, but I feel like it's related. So then I guess, because I feel like when you talked about kind of layered COVID mitigation strategies, and so if we're going to have a conversation about masks, do we also, is the conversation around the quarantine on the table as well, or is that something we are not able to make rules about?
The one thing I will say about if for schools that have universal mask wearing required, with that, if you're following CDC recommendations, that close contact identification drops to 3 feet. So we would be recommending, if we were able to, or what we're doing now, honestly, is just letting parents know if their child was a close contact and letting them have that decision. That's going to shrink by a lot. For that, 3 feet, 15 minutes is a lot different than a 6 feet, 15 minutes. So that there will be impact on that just in those identified as close contacts.
And I think that's when we sit down and have a conversation, like that's the kind of stuff I think will be helpful, because all these dominoes are kind of in a line, and I don't know if I think that input is helpful. Thank you.
I think similarly, if we have a discussion, something I know I'd want to hear a little bit about, probably from Paula, is procedurally, like within the classrooms. I know one of the things that's happened this year, right? Some teachers now are able to be in the front of the classroom. They might wear their mask normally, but they take them off in order to teach and project more. Whether or not your recommendation would still be allow that type of thing. Basically, what secondary effects might there be from any decision we're considering that we should be taking into account as it comes down to the educational environment, from your perspective?
My question is, I don't know if either of you have an answer for this, but it's regarding the ruling itself. Do we know how long will this take effect? Do we know anything about that piece?
It really depends. When I asked, it was, how long is this? Is this a day? Is this a week? It depends. I don't think there is a clear answer to that at this point.
Okay, so our safe bet would be just to go ahead, have the meeting and have the discussion and then go from there. Okay, great, thank you.
I would think that we will be getting some direction from multiple sources as early as tomorrow, so we can make sure that we get that available for the public and for the board's consideration.
All right, any other questions from the board? All right, thank you, Dr. Arnold. Then we will take any comments from the public on our COVID-19 update. So if you have a comment just on the COVID-19 update, you may either come forward if you're in the room, or if you are in the Zoom meeting, you may raise your hand and we will give you permission to speak. And please, let me remind you to state your name and address as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brandy Cunningham. I live at 2003 Cessa Street, and I have 3 children in the Ames School District, a 5th grader and 3rd grader at Edwards, and a preschooler at Northwood. My 8-year-old has a genetic metabolic disorder that puts him at high risk for severe complications for COVID. Since the start of the pandemic, my husband and I have done all that we can within our power to keep our children safe. We've kept them remote from school for 530 days, choosing to enroll them in online learning for the last year and a half. We've limited our outside exposure to friends and family, trying to keep our bubble as small as possible. Now that we've made the difficult decision to send them to school in person, we've continued to try to do all that we can to keep them safe. We transferred them to and from school to limit the number of other kids they're exposed to. We've purchased the highest level of filtered masks available in kid sizes. We've worked with district and building administrators to update our 504 plan to include classroom mitigation strategies. And we've had hard conversations one-on-one with staff members who are choosing not to mask to help them understand how they might be contributing to an unsafe environment for our most at-risk students, including our son. And still we worry each and every day that we aren't doing enough to keep them safe, because each and every day we send them to school knowing that despite all of our efforts, they are exposed to staff members and fellow students that are choosing not to mask, knowing that we are sending them into an educational environment that goes against the current CDC guidelines for COVID mitigation strategies. We are supporting their educational development at the potential risk of their physical health. So now I'm asking all of you as school board members to do all that you can within your power to help keep our kids safe, all of our kids safe. It's your responsibility to create a safe learning environment for all kids, not just those families who are fortunate enough to not have to choose between the health of their children and their educational development. And I urge our community to stop politicizing this issue and start humanizing this issue. And please take into consideration all families and students that you are charged with supporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Okay, we will take our remote folks here. We have Amanda Weinstein. And you've been given permission to speak.
Hi, my name is Amanda Weinstein. I live at 2930 Cypress Circle, and I normally have one kid in the Ames School District at Fellows. I too have, over the past year and a half, have kept my child home doing remote learning because of COVID-19. I myself am at high risk for complications, and she was born premature. And so we felt that the additional precautions were justified. And much like the previous speaker, I feel very strongly that given the change in circumstances, it's incredibly important for the board to go ahead and make the move that will keep children in the district as safe as possible. We were forced to make some very difficult decisions for our family, given the lack of a mask mandate this semester. But we would really like to come back to the district, and we would really like to see all the families that did not have to make that decision be as protected as possible. I think it's tremendously important that if we are now given the legal option of having a mask mandate and protecting our kids, we go forward and do so.
Thank you, Amanda. Joe Monahan. You've been given permission to speak.
Okay, thank you. By the way, the Des Moines Public Schools just issued a statement saying that they will reinstate their mask mandate on Wednesday of this week for those who didn't get that news. Iowa City Superintendent anticipates school mask mandate will begin following this judge's ruling as well. I hope Ames sees fit to join those progressive communities. I never thought I'd see the day that the governor of our state would issue orders to schools that put our children in danger. These are rules that serve no greater good. They are anti-science, and they serve the governor's political ambitions rather than serve the well-being of our students and their families. And I never thought I'd see the day that teachers and staff who we trust our children to would choose to put our children and their families in danger rather than be very slightly inconvenienced by a piece of nearly weightless fabric. And I never thought I would have to ask our school board to issue orders that reverse the insanity imposed on us by our governor, or issue orders that reverses the incredible display of selfishness seen among some of our teachers, some of our staff, and some of the parents of students in the Ames district. I'm asking you to do just that, to stand up to the insanity, the selfishness, and the cruelty that so many have shown towards our kids and their families. Please immediately impose a life-saving mask mandate for any and all who enter into our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Susie Johnson. You've been given permission to speak.
Thank you. This is Suzanne Johnson, 2502 Eisenhower Avenue in Ames. And I wanted to speak on behalf of our family, saying that we are so pleased to hear of this and that we are supporting what we hope will be the school board's decision to reinstate a universal mask mandate in our schools. We, like several others, have made big decisions, like folks around the world are doing, on the safety and the education and the development of our kids, and respect very much that people are making these difficult decisions. And I think one of the things that we're experiencing as individuals, and myself even as an adult in the workplace, is that when there is such a mandate, when we have people in such close quarters like students are in their classrooms and teachers in these classrooms, that's one less big decision for me to make for the day, that I know that it has been thought about from the health perspective, that our pediatricians and the CDC are saying this is what is one more mitigation that we can do to help keep others safe. And so we strongly encourage you to make that decision, and thank you very much for the really difficult work that you've done all this year. We appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Shane Hopkins. You've been given permission to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Shane Hopkins, 3025 Bayberry Road. I'm actually a physician at McFarland Clinic. I have 3 children who are in the school district, including an 11-year-old who is not yet eligible for the vaccine. We've been very concerned because he did not do particularly well with distance learning. And so we've chosen to homeschool him at this time. And we've also met with a lawyer to see if we have any opportunity to allow the good folks here on the board to follow the CDC guidelines to make the safest place possible following science. We believe that it's important for us as a community to demonstrate to our kids that science is important, not only in the curriculum, but also in the administration of the district and following that. I recognize that the hands are tied by the law that was passed, as well as the Department of Public Health regulations about contact tracing and quarantine and all of the other layers of prevention that are available to us. But I would say we are very open as parents to getting involved and making legal challenges that would allow our school district to do what is the right thing to do for our students following science. So I'm sure that the leadership here knows that the American Medical Association, American Hospital Association, besides the CDC, American Nursing Association, Academy of Pediatrics, and all pretty much the unified voice of medicine is in support of the recommendations of the CDC. And so that is the science, that is the facts, and getting away from the politics is the right thing to do. And I'm disappointed in our state that we're bound by political considerations right now. So if there's anything I can do as a parent, I want to make myself available to the board to contact us. We're happy to seek to help assist in allowing the layers that you mentioned before in other ways. There was both a state court case as well as a federal court case. The injunction in the state court case was not allowed. And the rationale for that was that there was no demonstration that any school district would immediately impose a mask mandate if the injunction were put in place. And so I would ask this group to make it a part of your upcoming meeting to, put in place some kind of specific overt statement about how you would follow CDC guidelines if you were able to do that, because that can be used in these ongoing legal challenges. And so my comment is in regard to just express appreciation. My sense from the way that you've presented yourself in this meeting so far is that you are on the side of science and you are taking these issues very carefully under consideration. And I support you and thank you very much for doing what's best for my children. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. Mark Peterson, you've been given permission to speak.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mark Peterson. I live at 2530 Somerset here in Ames. I have a 12th grader and an 8th grader in the district. I would just like to say a couple comments regarding this topic. The first is I think that for our family, the change for the district this fall has been a positive one. I find that our kids are generally happier and enjoy going to school without wearing masks. I also would like to make a comment that positivity rate in Story County, from what I've checked, has not gone up dramatically despite kids not wearing masks. And I think if you look at the overall long-term projection, I think COVID's going to be here for a long time, and I'm just very concerned about the mental health of our students if we go back to masking this year. And the science is still out from what I've read, at least in terms of the value of masks. I know that students do not wear the mask properly in school. They don't wear them properly on the bus now, and the mitigation value of the mask compared to in my opinion, the consequences of having them all the time is not beneficial. Also, the research still shows that kids are not getting sick in terms of needing to be hospitalized. If they do get COVID, it's mild cases. We've had the flu for years and years. We have kids that die from the flu every year. We haven't masked for the flu. And I just think that we need common sense around this topic. I understand there are families that have immunocompromised children in the district, and there's teachers that might be that way. And I would encourage the board to consider the best ways that they can mitigate risk for those families, for those teachers. And I understand that, but I think for the vast majority of students and families that attend Ames, this is what they want. They don't want to have to wear masks to school. So I think that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Atwood, you've been given permission to speak.
Hello, my name is David Atwood at 2732 Middle Glen Road, and I have two kids in the school system, one in grade 10 and one in grade 8. Now, last year when we were on distance learning, that did not work very well for them. And so my kids are attending in person. Unfortunately, I see that many people at the school are not wearing masks. So I would encourage you to put in place a mask mandate, and so that to keep all the kids safe from getting COVID. We're very worried that they might pick up the disease even though they're vaccinated, or pass it on to family members who might get very sick. So basically, I encourage you to institute the mask mandate now that it is legally possible. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Crystal Williams, you've been given permission to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I understand a lot of people's concerns about the no mask mandate, but also what people need to concern is that children are getting affected. And children are getting affected not just only in Ames community, but around the globe. This is something that should be taken seriously. I don't think that any child or any parent wants their child to wear a mask. But we should be thinking about the greater good of the community. I think that there's a lot of children that are getting sick. I don't want my child going back remotely. That wasn't a good thing for him. He was slacking and but not having the mask and everybody not wearing it, there's children that's still getting sick about that. I think the Ames should think about that. Think about the country around the world. Maybe it's not getting big here, but it's potentially can be. So I hope that Ames Community School District does think about our children and think about what can happen to them. I do believe in the school system. I don't want to wear the mask, but I wear it just to make everyone else safe. So that's all I really have to say about that.
Thank you, Crystal. Shannon Grunmeyer, you've been given permission to speak.
Great, thank you. This is Shannon Grunmeyer, 4910 Ontario Street. Thank you so much for all of your continued efforts to continue to learn about and follow the science on this. As you well know, schools have a legal obligation to provide a free and appropriate form of education for all of their students. And unfortunately, due to the law that has been in place, many of those mitigation strategies were taken away from you as a school district. Now that we have some reprieve from that, at least in the short term, I just would welcome any conversation around how we can work together to make sure that those children who are most at risk are able to receive their education in a way that is appropriate for them. I know there's a lot of feelings around whether or not we require masks for everyone or not. And I know that there are a lot of staffing issues in the district. And so separating children who might be more high risk might be ideal in some settings, but I also know it's not realistic given how short-staffed everyone is. So that is why, again, we just kind of expressed this need for the formal masking mandate be put back in place so that all students can attend and receive an appropriate education. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Shannon. Tracy Turner, you've been given permission to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick comment. I want to first say, as a parent, I absolutely support a mask mandate, but I do worry that this unfortunately will be a divisive issue that the community has to struggle with. I just want to throw out there a possible solution or just an idea that the board may consider to require masks of staff and teachers across the board to mask up, to require masks for all grade levels that yet aren't eligible or able to vaccinate, but to possibly, for those that can be vaccinated, not try to enforce a mask mandate. So I'm just thinking about the high school students and the administration and the pressure that will put on the high school to police a mask mandate. So I just thought I would throw that out there as a thought from one parent in the community, that this could take some pressure off of administrators and board members. Again, the idea of a mask mandate for K through 8. Thank you.
Can you hold on for 1 second and can you give me your address, please?
Oh, I'm so sorry. 3040 Bayberry.
Thank you. And thank you for your comment. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak on the COVID-19 update? Okay, then we will move on to our discussion items. And our first discussion item is our board committee update. And we'll start with the facilities committee.
Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. Much like many facility meetings, it was mostly the high school construction project, and we discussed some of the closing off of the Mitchell Elementary renovation. And it looks like the cell tower agreement is going to get finalized here soon. And we did discuss again and just clarified that For the AHS Stadium, the recommendation of the committee was for the facilities director to get an engineering firm to take a look at the facility and see what the situation really is, so we can kind of assess that and get on to any master planning we have for facilities for the future.
Any questions for Facilities Committee?
I just have a question about the stadium replacement. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Effectively, when Jerry was going through the master plan recently, he realized the stadium was not listed on the master plan, and it's about 60 years old and suffering some maintenance issues. So what he talked with us about was basically, what do we think we should do about that relating to the master plan? And our recommendation was to support what he came to us with, of getting some sort of engineering firm like we do for some of the other facilities to take a look at the stadium, assess its current maintenance situation, its longevity, anything we need to be planning about that, and how best to take care of it.
I guess I'm surprised to hear that, you know, just, was it 2 or 3 years ago, we were having conversations about building the high school, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, like the stadium and the field was like a huge part of that conversation, and we had to try to build stuff around it. And so I'm confused. Do you remember that? There was like a whole, we had like, I feel like we've had a lot of conversations. So now to hear, oh, we didn't, oops, we missed it, and now we got to maybe redo it. I'm confused. I'm not understanding. So maybe when you go back to the next meeting, we could just get some clarity about that, because I feel like a lot of the decisions we made about the high school were based on the stadium, where it is and all of that. And I'm confused.
Okay. Yeah, we can take that back.
Are there any other board committee updates? All right. And are there any comments from the public on our board committee update only? Yeah, if you have a comment on the board committee update, you may raise your hand. Okay. Our next discussion item is teaching and learning, and we can turn it over to Dr. Jeff Hawkins and Erin Miller.
Well, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to have a follow-up conversation. You know, the last time we got together, I presented the board some information about process, and rightfully so. The board said, great, but we'd like to hear some more specifics about the plan itself, in particular about how the plan for the use of ESSER 3 funds can be targeted towards the groups that have been identified by the committee that said they need to be targeted through our data analysis. So I appreciate the opportunity to come to you with some information that I hope will answer some of the questions that we had last time. I don't have a slideshow per se, but I do have a series of documents that I want to walk the board through. Be happy to present those and then answer your questions about them. The first one that I want to walk you through is a piece of information that was shared with the committee as we went through about the plan. And that is that we can click on that very top left-hand supporting document right there. Thank you very much. This is an example of the use of ESSER funds that had been designated prior to, if you will, the committee coming together.
Just quick, for those who are not as deeply familiar as you are, ESSER stands for,
Okay.
and the origin of those funds, if you just provide that background.
Very good. Okay, so I believe it's the American Relief Act identified a set of funds that could be given from the federal government to the state and to local school districts in order to focus on a wide variety of ways to use those monies. And in the case of ESSER 3, there are 4 specific ways that our state has told us that we have to use those funds, right? Those 4 specific ways are to use money in a way to ensure that school can be operated for in-person learning, right? That we find ways to extend time, that if there was time lost through COVID. So again, the whole point of this funding stream, and maybe this gets to your question, Director, is the point of this funding stream is to say we recognize that during the process of COVID instruction last year, that probably the educational process may have had some gaps in learning. There could have been some learning lost. So these funds, particularly ESSER 3, right, so there is ESSER 1, 2, and 3, all coming from the federal government. There's some rules about spending them. You can't spend 2 before you spent 1. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've spent 1. We've not exhausted our ESSER 2 funds yet. But when ESSER 3 came out, with the 4 purposes that I'm stating here, there was a requirement that at least 20% of those funds was spent on the learning loss portion. So again, I'll try to bullet that really quickly. Number 1, prevention and mitigation strategies. Number 2, extended time, where we see things like summer school or after school tutoring. Number 3, broad catch-all, other uses of the funds, similar to other appropriate spending of general funds. And number 4 was to address the academic and social emotional needs, particularly of groups that our data would suggest were most impacted. And that last purpose is really where the committee was engaged. I don't know if I answered your question.
And because governments like acronyms, it is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funds, ESSER funds. So that's what it stands for.
Just thought it would be helpful to have that out there.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. So again, this exhibit simply shows you that as we were spending ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, before ESSER 3 was released to us and before the requirements of ESSER 3 were released to us, some of those monies had been spent. So I wanted the board to be able to see that portion of the plan, right? That some money had already been allocated. And as you can see, there was money spent prior to the committee coming together for the purposes of helping to fund summer school. That would have been the money spent from ESSER 3. Exhibit 2 actually begins with a table. Yep, if you go to, there you go, perfect. Begins with a table that, quite frankly, I probably should have included in my presentation last time. It was the information that was shared on our website about the breakdown of broad strategies that would be used associated with those 4 required purposes. So this is still on our website as of today. And this was part of the information that was provided. Remember last time when I presented you guys information about community input? This information, as well as an FAQ and some other information, is associated with the same place where we asked for community input. So you can see that table right there that outlines, again, broad categories. But I also know that we asked as a board to have more than broad categories. We wanted some specific information. So in addition to how we'd spent money prior to the committee, we've spent some money since that committee has met. And that's what you see in the table down below, right? So what are some of those expenses that have been indicated or utilized from ESSER funds? You can see most of those are from ESSER 2. Why is that? Because we haven't spent all of our ESSER 2 funds yet. So unless this is strictly for learning loss, which is the only thing we can allocate to that ESSER 3 fund yet, we have to spend ESSER 2 before we can get to ESSER 3. You can see mostly, again, what has been allocated to ESSER 3 is for summer school. The third exhibit that I wanted to share with you, again, we had some conversation about how is it that we are identifying specific strategies to target specific groups of students that our data and our process identified in need of being targeted. So we have looked through that research. I want to share with you some of the things that are shown through that research so that you can see where those align with the plan that we're presented, right? So hopefully, as we get into some of the strategies, you'll see alignment between the work of the district and the strategies. But I always think it's helpful to set some context when we're talking about research. As many of you know, there's lots of research out there. So where did this research come from? So I'm going to read from you an excerpt from the summary of this research piece so that you as the board and our community has an idea of where did this research come from. Okay, so the research that I'm going to present in the next exhibit comes from the Midwest Education, the Regional Educational Laboratory of the Midwest. If you want to scroll up a little bit, I'm really starting kind of at that italicized question. That group got together to address this question. What interventions have been shown to be associated with improved academic achievement of Black students according to evidence tiers of 1, strong evidence, 2, moderate evidence, and 3, promising evidence from the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. So it's kind of our Public Accountability Act. To address the question, the Midwest, the Regional Educational Laboratory Midwest Literature Review Team scoured an extensive set of research databases to find studies that explicitly mention associations between interventions and improved academic achievement of Black students, regardless of associations with outcomes for other students or for other subgroups. For this research review, an intervention was defined as a policy, a practice, a program, or other malleable factor. Outcome measures of interest include students' achievement on standardized tests in English language arts and math, high school graduation rates, and high school dropout rates. The review team screened 3,917 reports, abstracts to identify quantitative studies published since 2002 that included a focus on Black students and presented an indicator of statistical association between an intervention and one or more of the outcomes of interest. For those abstracts that described a study meeting these criteria, the project team attempted to obtain the full text study report. Following the removal of studies that not meet the screening criteria, 53 studies remained. The literature review team then examined 53 studies more closely to determine if they met the criteria for tiers 1, 2, or 3 per the U.S. Department of Education's non-regulatory guidance on ESSA. Again, that's the Accountability Act. These tiers are labeled strong evidence, moderate evidence, and promising evidence. The detailed examination of those 53 studies found that no studies provided strong or moderate evidence, and 22 studies provided promising evidence. The 22 studies showed statistically significant associations between 20 interventions and the academic achievement of Black students. 2 interventions were each supported by evidence from 2 studies. So again, before I present to you strategies that are being advocated for, I want to help make sure I'm setting the context of where did those come from in research. I also today received, but I'm not prepared to present it publicly yet, some information from a Hanover research group that suggests specific strategies, and there's other individual research reports that we read and incorporated into the plan as well, but this is the primary one that I would say would be a meta-analysis, not really a meta-analysis. This would be a review of multiple studies. And then again, lower on that second page is that tier of evidence, which you'll see looks pretty closely to what that evidence tier looked like for the committee who worked through the ESSA planning that I shared with you last time. So what are some of those strategies that research suggests? We can look at the next. So again, this is from that same REL Midwest group. And this is a summary of the specific strategies that the analysis of those 3,917 studies came up with, the 22 studies that met their criteria for evidence. Here are the specific strategies that were suggested. You can see that there are state level, district level, school level, and classroom level interventions. There are also programmatic interventions. At the district level, those involve ensuring that the teachers that are in classrooms are highly qualified. At the school level, there are some program or game models. There's also mentoring and increasing parental involvement as suggested strategies. Teaching student success skills and having a positive social, emotional, and character development curriculum. At the classroom level, you'll notice that there are lots of references to math-specific items. I can tell you in my research of the literature, there are a number of specific research studies that are addressing literacy as well. I have to assume that those research studies maybe didn't make their criteria for going from 3,900 to 53 to 22. But there, I wouldn't want to present this to the board as if there's not some specific research studies about improving performance of Black, Latinx, or students with multiple races. You can see in the classroom level, there's high expectations about math, time on task in math, grade-specific instructional focuses for math, instructional strategies around math, homework, and then encouraging kids to be involved in out-of-school programs, summer reading programs, and other things. So I wanted to be able to report back to the board some examples of what at least I personally would say is a high quality research institution doing an analysis of thousands of research studies to come back with some concrete strategies. And those can give us great guidance as we then put together our plan. So the last exhibit for you here shows interventions moving forward. Again, these are specific interventions around that learning loss. Remember that fourth category. So I didn't list in here necessarily things that were being spent on PPE. I did list that earlier, right? I don't want you to think that we're not using ESSER funds to make sure that our nurses have the PPE they need. We are. And I don't want you to think that we're not using ESSER funds, right, for some of the other purposes. But I think the crux of our conversation really came down to how are we using ESSER funds to address learning loss? And specifically, how are we using ESSER funds to address learning loss of the prioritized and targeted groups that the committee came up with after data analysis? So you'll see that this table for you in this last exhibit is put together specifically by those groups, right? So the first one is K2 literacy. If you remember last time I showed you a slide that said here are the different groups that the committee identified after analyzing data. One of those was K2 literacy. So the way this table is organized is if K2 literacy is a priority area, what are some examples of interventions? What would be the funding source for those? And what would be an anticipated budget for that intervention? Hopefully that answers some of the specific questions of which interventions are targeted for which groups and what are some of the very specific things we're going to do and how much might those cost. You can see some of those things are to be determined as far as cost, right? We're still looking into costs or getting cost projections. I would tell you that all of them say approximately. One of the things I would point out is that some of the costs are budgeted as maybe a multi-year cost, and other things would be things that would be more on an annual basis. I'm hopeful that as you see the different interventions listed on the left-hand side, and we think about the interventions that are suggested, at least in this one research study, there are some, like for example, I'm going to tell you the material supplies, professional development on phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, comprehension, and critical thinking. Those were strategies that were suggested in other research studies. I don't know why that research study didn't make the 22 of this, but it was a research study that addressed specifically how to increase performance of African-American males and students in special education. That was that particular research study. So I want you to know that not this plan isn't only this resource, but I'm hoping you see alignment between the plan and the resource. So you can see when it comes to secondary math, there needs to be some professional development around best instructional and intervention practices. I point that out specifically because if we scroll to page 2, you can see this is a snapshot of what the What Works Clearinghouse. I've talked with the board before about the What Works Clearinghouse, but just as a quick reminder, that is a federal government-run website that is intended to house and collect best practices or evidence-based practices in various areas. These are what the What Works in Math Clearinghouse would suggest as best instructional practices for elementary, middle and high school, and best intervention practices. So I thought, quite frankly, the line of professional development around best practices in math might be a little broad. So I wanted to provide you some additional detail about, well, what do we mean by best practices in instruction and intervention in math? That's what these are. You can see, I hope that you can see embedded through the plan is plans for specific and explicit literacy instruction, math instruction, formative assessment. One that came up over and over and over again in the research studies that I read was the importance of culturally relevant pedagogy. That came up quite a bit, and you can see the continued professional development emphasis on culturally relevant pedagogy. Again, still addresses the idea of PSYOP training, some of the other interventions that I've mentioned previously. I think that's all of my presentations. I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, ma'am.
So many of these strategies that you present here look like they would be of great ongoing value in our district. Are they going to be sustainable in terms of funding once the ESSER spigot is turned off?
Thank you. I appreciate that. We actually talked about that in the committee, right? And so when we invest our ESSER funds in a person or a piece of software that has to be renewed, we have it for the time that we have the money to renew it. When we invest our funds in growing our own capacities through professional development, we get to keep that learning with us even after the funds are gone. And so you'll see a balance of things here. One of the things that was discussed in the committee was even when we are spending money on people, like for example, there was discussion around that math interventionist, could part of that be about intervening with kids, and could also part of that be about capacity building with other adults in the system so that they know those interventions and have the opportunity to work with somebody who's really strong in those before that person is not a part of our system any longer.
Any other questions for Dr. Hopkins?
I have a question. I can see on the what has been spent thus far and then some of the anticipated budget. When do you anticipate rolling all of this? Is it a continual rollout process? We'll be able to see some of this rolled out this school year yet. Talk us through a little bit of how that timeline works.
Okay. I would probably want to defer to Chris a little bit on budgetary rollout, but what I think you should expect from me and from us as a system is to regularly review data with you over how is this going? Are we getting recovery and learning loss? Are we seeing what we want to see? And how does that relate to how we're spending funds? So one of the commitments that we made to our committee was that, you know, we're gonna put our best foot forward. Remember I talked about that three-circled approach. We were going to take suggestions of our staff, that were evidence-based, right? That were supported by evidence. But yes, we're also going to track the data. So I think I could speak comfortably to, for the most part, we're going to attempt to every 6 months come back to the board and say, here's what we've been doing. Sometimes that might be an action step. Here's the steps we've made forward and moving forward on professional development. To be really frank with you, professional development isn't something that you usually see a lot of change in data over 6 months, because it takes a while to capacitize staff and then see that implemented and see the change. So I could speak to you about coming back to this group with data reports and the implications that would have on how we spend that budget. But as far as like how regularly, I mean, for the positions that are contracted, obviously we give, for the most part, a year-long contract. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything to that.
So a lot of the ones that are on the first sheet that we have, those were known during budgets, and they were stuff we started with ESSER 1 and then because of some cuts we made, we've shifted some stuff to ESSER funds during budget. That was that very first spreadsheet. So that was from budget time. So we were rolling those positions over. There were a couple of, we added a couple of elementary sections this fall after we had some enrollment growth. So those we'll have to absorb during budget so that they're not on that funding cliff, because those should be ongoing expenditures. Some of the others that on there, quite honestly, were just because there was no staff this fall. I mean, we were struggling and made it, but got our classrooms full. So trying to find those additional staffs for all those interventionists weren't necessarily possible this fall. Is that correct, Dr. Hawkins?
Yeah.
But might be something we can do in the spring to hire for next fall.
Like, so for example, when you look on that last exhibit under secondary math, when you see an asterisk next to the math interventionist, it's because we couldn't find a math interventionist. I don't want to give up on that idea. Clearly, in the research bases we've looked at, including the research bases on how to impact achievement for our specifically targeted groups, it talks about math intervention and explicit math instruction. So just because we couldn't find it this fall doesn't mean that I want to give up on trying to hire a math interventionist, but we're going to need to push that to later on in this 3-year cycle of the budget. Just as a reminder to the board, our funds from ESSER 3 are available to us through June of 2023, 2024. So we have some time to spend those funds, but of course we always want to be watching our data and seeing if we're getting what we planned.
And Dr. Hawkins, you mentioned that coming back to the board and reporting, that's part also of the fund, right? That yes. You're supposed to, how often are you reporting to, who are you reporting to, that Iowa Department of Ed?
Let me get a little clarity on that. I would want to reread that portion of the code.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm not ready to answer that off the top of my head and make sure that that's accurate.
Okay, no worries. I just vaguely remember something about reporting back something.
Yeah, we do need to, but I would want to look that up to determine whether that's reporting back to the board, to the committee, or to the Department of Ed, or all three.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Hawkins, you referenced this as an initial plan. I think that's what you called it. Is that right?
I'm not sure how I referenced it, but I do anticipate that the plan will grow and evolve as our data does and as we see the effectiveness of the interventions.
So where is this in terms of when you're like, okay, now we've got our strategy? Is this 30%, 90%? How much more tweaking is there left?
Okay, that's a good question. I feel like there's some more tweaking when it comes to some things that we know we want that we don't have access to. That's one area that needs some tweaking. I have a hard time estimating the percentage of that. I'm sorry. I feel like how these strategies lines up really well with the pillars of the committee and the research bases we've looked at. So to me, the adjustments of the plan need to be about whether it's we need to get past a good intention of a plan. And yep, your good intentions align with what a research base says is good, to are we getting the results? So to me, the adjustment of the plan is based on whether we're getting the results of the plan. It's hard. I sure hope that all the steps we've taken to be really diligent about this yield results, but it's hard so I mean, ideally we'd have minimal adjustment because everything we did was really well implemented and we're getting data that shows results. But it's hard for me to predict at this point, like, oh yeah, we're probably going to need to adjust 50% of it because we're not getting what we want. But I think we need to be open to the idea that if we're not getting what we want, then we need to use our funds differently.
And so you've already said that some of the funds have been spent, right? And so when is this plan and the spending associated with it going to start?
Well, again, some of the money is in process of being spent. So like, here's a good example. We are right at the crux of sending out some communication to families about after-school tutoring based upon our fall screening data and our last spring screening data, right? So we're right there to spend. We've already put together the budget that's going to cost a good portion. That's why we have the money, but it's going to cost a good portion of money to provide transportation to families who want to engage in that after-school tutoring. We've got volunteer tutors lined up, but we're looking for, so I'm getting too far into the weeds, I apologize. So there's money being spent currently on that. So it's already, there's money that was spent previously. There's money that's being spent right now on Ingenuity and PPE. There's money being spent right now on after-school tutoring. There's plans in place to figure out, okay, when and how are we gonna spend money for some of the professional development, and then some of those funds won't be able to be spent until we are able to engage and schedule that professional development. I know that's a broad answer.
No, that's what I.
Yes, money's being spent right now.
So this plan is really being implemented right now. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Components of it. I wouldn't so for example, as I shared with you, we're having a hard time seeing if we could get additional mental health support. But as soon as there's personnel available to do that, we'll be spending that portion of that money right now.
Well, I just want to share some feedback for you and your team. I appreciate this report. I feel much better. I can tell you did a lot of work, so thank you. This might be one of the best presentations I've seen in my time on the board. So that's how my brain works, right? With the little categories. That's not shade to anybody else who's presented. Everybody else did a great job too. But I appreciate this. I feel like I should be as forceful and vehement as I was with my frustrations. I feel like I should gesticulate or point at something. So thank you for this. It's much improved.
I appreciate it. And to be, I know this sounds kind of whatever, but I appreciate the push, right? I told you, a lot of you that personally after the meeting last time. I appreciate hey, we appreciate the process update, but we want some more specific. It was a good push. So thank you.
I still have a question. So it appears that this puts forward something that I don't know if it's the right term, but kind of a need-based resource allocation.
Yeah.
Is that how you would look at it as a district? Like, is it basically being targeted to students that are most in need? So we spend the money where the students most need it.
Yeah, that was the whole intention of doing data analysis to identify what is our data. Because I think when we get to needs-based spending, obviously that has to be tightly correlated to a data analysis. So the whole point of the process was to look super close at our data, let our data tell us where the need lies, and then design a plan grounded in research-based strategies that address those, and then monitor that data to see if we get the results we want.
So I think at the high level from the board perspective, the thing I'd like to mention to board members is I think that's a takeaway we should really think about doing going forward in everything we're thinking about, because that's really the way to have the biggest impact. And to the discussion we had last week, it's just like summer school. We know who the students are that need the support. We need to find the way to support them. And I think a needs-based resource allocation would be the best way to do that. So I'd encourage us to keep coming back to that in the future outside of just ESSER. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. excellent to see it laid out this way, and it was really helpful for those of us who maybe don't have as thorough of an understanding of the process. So I really appreciate that too.
Not a problem. I'll be excited for when we get together in a little while and report like, hey, here's how many kids are going to after school tutoring, and here's the impact of the AmeriCorps tutoring that's happening inside the building. Here's what's going on with some math professional development. And so I'll be excited to start reporting back to you on what implementation looks like and how that's beginning to impact data. I do want to give another caveat. I know y'all heard it and I saw a lot of your heads nod, but I don't believe you're gonna, I hope this is not too bold, but I don't believe it's reasonable to expect to see data improvement results from professional development in 6 months, but it probably is reasonable to expect improvements in data for direct instruction interventions.
Do you think you could start putting together a plan then for how you will be reporting that to us, like whether it's quarterly? And to me, it's just as important, not only the data about the outcomes, but also just getting an update on how is the plan on roll. Like you said, some of the things are going to change. So just letting us know which parts have been going well logistically and how's it going. That type of thing. I think every few months would be something I would recommend or like to see, just so we see how that's going.
You bet. Yep. I can give both process updates and data updates as the board desires.
And thank you. And just, I'll be quick. Thank you for the presentation, but also thank you for that sentence about the improvement, because that's clarity, and that then we don't have the wrong expectations. So I appreciate that clarity, and I don't know, I bring more of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, there's one last attachment on this page, and that might help us address some of the times when you might expect to see some data come back, because we're going to talk about just really briefly the comprehensive assessment plan. That's what CAP stands for, that the board gets to approve every year. So you're looking at a list of some universal screening assessments. So those are checks that we can see fall, winter, and spring to see how our students are doing. One update for you here is that the elementary grades in reading and math are grades 2 through 5 are going to change assessments this year. They're going to change to the MAP assessment, and that will give us better data. It reports for teachers a little bit more on which standards are kids ready for and which standards might they need some support in mastering. And it also aligns with what our 6 through 12 are doing. So we will have a little bit better way to look from 2nd grade through 12th grade, how our students progressing through our system. So that's just a little update on one of the shifts you'll see on this document. The other thing you'll notice in yellow is that the ISASP, so that's the statewide summative assessment. So they, not just a screener 3 times a year, but just the one in the spring that says, are our students meeting the standards that the state has set forward? That's in yellow because the state hasn't released their final dates. So we're assuming, they have always said it should be in the last 12 weeks of the year. They usually open it up right after spring break. So this is a week after that, so that we have a little buffer. So there's a possibility that I would need to come back and amend those dates if the state should change their window, but we don't anticipate that happening. So we are comfortable bringing it forward for initial approval. You'll also see some assessments that are unique to just certain groups of students. So our alternate assessments, some special education students with IEPs take, and then our English learning assessment, ALPA 21. We have a screening window there as well. And then we have an overall test then in February. So these will be great checks. As Dr. Hawkins mentioned, we probably won't be able to say, if we did some learning around SIOP, which is that Sheltered Instructional Observation Protocol that has a strong research base to help our English language learners. That won't necessarily impact the scores in 1 year. That might take a little bit of time for teachers to get mastery of, but we may be able to see progress from fall to winter to spring on those screening assessments this year with kids who are getting those interventions.
What's the stamp? The 10th, 11th, and 12th take?
Yes, that's a great question, that I cannot remember the acronym right now. Hold on just a second. Yes, thank you for asking that. I remember. That's the program. I was thinking it was by literacy, and I didn't want to say it until I made sure. So that, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we offer now the Seal of Biliteracy, which is kind of an exciting achievement our high school students can attain. It shows that they are proficient in 2 or more languages. Some of our students take the test in more than 1 language. So they can show English proficiency in either the ALPA 21. So if they're an English learner, they can show proficiency there, or they can show proficiency on ISASP, the state test in English language arts. And then they can take the stamped language proficiency test in a different language to show proficiency in that language. And then they can get a seal on their diploma, the Seal of Biliteracy. So I would have to look up the number of students that we had achieve the seal this last spring. I don't have that on the top of my head, but we have had some students do that, and we're excited to open up that to even more students.
Can I ask you a question about the ISASP data or how we will interpret it? So I've been on the board for 4 years, and there's always been some kerfuffle with the ISASP, right? And so I'm wondering, because and my sense has been that the data's never been really reliable because of the kerfluffles, right? It's like the first year it was new or something happened, I can't even remember. Then there was COVID, then everybody was online, and now we're in whatever the heck this is. I don't even know what this is. And so I'm wondering how useful what is your sense about how useful the ISASP data will be, or really any of these? That one seems to mean more, but is also.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's the one that we use for the state accountability system. So Dr. Hawkins was talking about ESSA, and the state identifies schools for targeted or comprehensive support with the accountability measures, and that is largely based on 3 things. ISASP is a big one, and then it's based on our ALPA 21, so our English learner scores, and it's also based on the conditions for learning, so the survey data that students take about how they're feeling safe or supported in our schools. And so we need to take ISASP seriously because of those state accountability measures. We actually just had a really good talk with our admin team about ISASP, kind of reminding ourselves, what does the state say the purpose of ISASP is? What do we believe about the ISASP test, and what assumptions? Kind of the conversation was, what assumptions can we make and what assumptions shouldn't we make based on this one data point, keeping in mind that it's one snapshot in a kid's life on one day. So we had some good conversations about convergent data using multiple pieces of evidence before we said that a student was or was not meeting their academic expectations, including classroom assessment data. So it's really important to look at all of those things. You're totally right. If you've been on the board 4 years, gosh, the first year was probably the old Iowa assessments, and then we rolled out new Iowa assessments, and then we didn't take the Iowa assessments. And then we took them last year, and and the students who took them on site are in our numbers, but you'll see that we had about 570 students that took them remotely that we can't count. And won't show up in our data because the state is considering those like a separate test. So they're not in with the rest of our results. So it's going to be a strange year for ISASP data all the way around. So I think it informs the system a little bit. I was telling somebody, I think it was you, I think we were talking about doing something called quadding, right? Where you look at kids who are proficient on ISASP and proficient on MAP, and kids who are proficient on one and not the other, right? And then kids who aren't proficient on either on these. So you kind of are looking at a couple data points. MAP, we know, is a multiple choice reading test. ISASP, we know, involves short answers. It asks kids to justify their thinking, and it has a writing component. So if you're thinking about, for example, kids who are proficient in MAP, the multiple choice, like more of a comprehension-based test, but not proficient in English language arts, that might tell you that's a group of kids that maybe we should be looking at for some writing interventions, right? So there's some ways that we can use it, and we can get different student level reports than we used to. So there's some kind of exciting opportunities there. But as we know with any test, it's again, that one snapshot. It's dangerous to put too much, in my opinion, too much weight on one test when you're talking about a student, a child in the classroom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess looking at these tests and thinking back to the previous presentation about ESSER, what's the baseline data that we're judging ESSER success on? Is it kind of like the ESSER data was itself, if it's really about percentage that meets proficiency at each grade level, or how are you looking at that to know whether the ESSER interventions are working?
Well, we grounded a lot of, like, so for example, when I identified K2 literacy, or we identified some specific, that those data sets would have come from FAST data. And so looking at elementary literacy data, because we're using MAP as a benchmarking for our students now instead of FAST, I would suggest that we're going to need to take a little bit of time and figure out, okay, and MAP does actually a pretty nice job of saying, if you're here, what is your projected growth? So it won't take us long to kind of start using MAP as a way to assess that data. But what would I expect to see? It would be, I would expect to see growth in MAP data for students that are receiving the interventions, right? So is that answering your question?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And then we actually, when we identified secondary math, it was actually grounded in math data. So some of the data sets that the committee looked at are already using math data. The elementary, we're going to have to establish a baseline with the initial screening that will happen in a few weeks. And then again, we should expect to see growth for those students that are receiving interventions.
All right, well, thank you both for taking the time to present to us. And then we will take any comments from the public on the teaching and learning discussion item. So if you have a comment on the teaching and learning discussion item, you may raise your hand. Joe Monahan, you've been given permission to speak.
Yep. Thank you. I forgot to say earlier, I have a son at Ames High School, and I live at 711 V Avenue in Boone County, actually. I spent about the last 15 years of my career in instructional technology and in distance education in the College of Engineering at ISU. And I had the opportunity to consult at colleges in the Ukraine, in the country of Georgia, and a number of universities in India. They were all engineering science professors that I worked with, and they all had one thing in common. None of them wanted to work with me because the technology I was presenting to them was a barrier to teaching. They thought of it that way. The other thing that they all had in common is that their students loved the fact that I was an A student who wanted to be an A+ student, or a D student who was just desperately hoping to pass the class. They all wanted access to this online learning, whether they were in the dorms or whether they were in Saudi Arabia, it didn't matter. They wanted to be able to review what was done in the class. If they were sick, they didn't want to fall behind. And so my job was to present the simplest, most transparent technology to the professors possible. It didn't interfere with their teaching, while giving the students, wherever in the world they were, access to quality educational content. I spent a lot of years figuring out how to do that and making sure that it was easy and inexpensive to do. When I hear these funds coming in that are one-time funds, and the question was a good one, are they sustainable? I've worked in universities in a number of different states over a lot of decades, and I see that these one-time funds disappear. And 5 years down the road, nobody can even remember them. So what I would just encourage is that you look at this money, not as a one-time fund, but as a way to lay the groundwork for technology that will help everybody. Not necessarily, yes, it will help a targeted subgroup of the student body, but this very same technology can be used to help everybody in the school, and whether they're homesick, whether they're out because of COVID, whether regardless. And initially, I know the teachers push back until they kind of see how the technology can be worked, even to their own benefit. And then we start seeing like a universal sort of understanding of the long-term benefits of this investment and how to use the technology that benefits the school and the students, not just for until the federal money runs out, but lays the groundwork for a really long time and valuable investment. So that's what I wanted to say. And I would be glad to help. I don't charge. I'm happy to consult for any time for free, but I just like to see this money really well spent for the entire student body.
Thank you, Joe. All right, seeing no other hands raised, we will go ahead and move on to our public forum, and I will read our statement on public comments. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And we do not have anyone in the room who has signed up for the public forum, so we will move right into our online participants. And Joe Thompson, you've been given permission to speak. Joe, if you just want to hit your unmute button.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Joe Thompson. I live at 926 South Dakota Avenue here in Ames. Last week, my daughter came home. She's a senior at Ames High School. She came home. She was very upset. She mentioned to me at the time when I questioned what was going on, that particular day there had been 4 fights in the school building, in the hallways at Ames High School. During the course of my discussion with her, she relayed to me that although certainly 4 fights in a single day is highly unusual, it's not, however, unusual for there to be fights in the hallways at Ames High School. And I found this somewhat unbelievable, to tell you the honest truth. I've gone to high school. I mean, I know kids will fight for a variety of reasons, but fights inside the school building is sort of a new phenomenon to me. So I was very concerned about this, and she and I had a long discussion, and eventually later, after talking with her, I did write an email to the superintendent, to the principal, to the entire school board. I was very pleased to get responses from some of them. The principal, the superintendent, a couple of members of the school board. I wasn't asking for any specifics. What I was curious about was if this is a common phenomenon at Ames High, it seems like there should be work being done on it. I'd like to know who is working on it and what that plan involves. And the responses I got were that obviously it's a very concerning issue. Everybody is committed to working on this. And I'm not actually looking for specifics. What I ultimately ended up finding out just from my discussions with other people is that this had been addressed in a not unsurprising way with removal of the students who are fighting. And I'd hate to think that that is the ultimate answer. We just wash our hands of it. We say, well, these were troublemaking students. They've been expelled, and that's the end of it. And I believe that's a very short-sighted approach. So I would encourage the board, the superintendent, everybody else to come up with a more specific plan, and I would love to hear about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Angela Shaw, you've been given permission to speak.
Hello, good evening. My name is Angela Shaw. I live at 5411 Tennessee Street here in Ames, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Ames Youth and School Action Team, or ASAT. ASAT is focused on educational equity in 4 areas: academic achievement, discipline, district policies, and hiring retention practices. The Ames Community School District has stated that their #1 priority is educational equity and improvement. Over the past 4 years, there have been much effort to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is the center of all conversations. Today, I am coming to you with concerns about the discipline policies. 2 examples, one being SROs. Data suggests that our SROs' actions in the school have been discipline and disciplinary functions, while their stated contract is for building relationships. It was a recommendation from this board and the former superintendent Reisner to remove SROs from the schools until these 2 duties, the actual and the function, align. A task force was formed in late spring, and they were supposed to have a recommendation in the summer. No recommendation has come out, but SROs are back in the schools. This is very concerning. Another concern by ASAT is disciplinary practices related to the high school. We are concerned that the district will not be led by research and evidence-based evidence and further influence or increase the school to prison pipeline by just simply kicking these kids out of school. If you did not look at the Des Moines Register this past Sunday, Iowa City School District has outlined a 189-page basic plan on how they hope to approach discipline. Things like training their teachers, standardizing discipline across schools, monitoring data. These are some of the actions that Superintendent Reisner was putting into place prior to being removed. ASAT asked the school district focus on discipline and making sure that it is aligned with current research and evidence recommendation and does not support the school to prison pipeline. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Angela. Olivia Reed. The Zoom. Olivia, it would appear that your version of Zoom will not allow you to have permission to speak. So if you would like to try to sign in on a different device, that might resolve the problem. And then if you raise your hand again, we can take your comment at that time. Oh, I saw Leslie Kim, your hand was up for a minute and now it is, oh, okay. Leslie Kim, you have been given permission to speak.
Would it actually be all right if we wait for, at least until we go, for Olivia to come back into the Zoom meeting?
Yes,
and
okay.
move on to
Can we do that? So I believe this is a group of students who we're going to speak to the board.
That's correct.
Okay. Are we able to move on and come back if she can get in?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay. All right. Are there other members of the public who are wishing to speak as part of the public forum?
It's not a public forum without a technology glitch.
I know. Let's go ahead and move on to our consent items, and we will.
Do we want to let them know that to raise their hand? I wonder if it's clear for them.
Yep, do go ahead and raise your hand, Olivia, when you're able to come back into the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to our consent items and I will entertain a motion.
I move the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Bankin, and Superintendent Vincent.
It's once again my pleasure to acknowledge the generosity in our community and express appreciation for many gifts that have been given over the past month. We have 7 anonymous donors that have contributed to the Lunch Heroes program. We also have a gift from the O'Brien Family McDonald's and a gift from the Hy-Vee at Lincoln Center. Again, much appreciation for the generosity.
Thank you. It was moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Bankin. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Keep an eye here. Okay. And Olivia Reed, you have been given permission to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and for your patience. I'm so sorry about that technology issue there. Olivia Reed, I live on 2107 Country Club Boulevard. I'm a student at Ames High, and I've come to speak to you today as a representative of the Ames High Club Cause, alongside 2 other club leaders. Cause stands for Citizens Actualizing and Understanding Sustainable Environments, and we've made it our mission to educate ourselves and the community on climate change and take action to make our local area more sustainable. The ever-looming crisis of climate change poses an incredible burden on young people that generations before us have never had to experience. Students like me have to ask themselves, will my planet be okay? Will my home survive? And science points to no, not at this pace of pollution and destruction. We are facing the threat of an inhabitable planet. While it may not be as pressing for the generations of adults that are present today, our future and the futures of our children look bleak. So what is then the responsibility of a school? Is it not to equip and prepare children for their future and develop them into critical thinkers and active citizens and into change makers? Right now, students are left alone in their anxieties and questions, or maybe indifference and ignorance when it comes to climate change. But if our schools promoted respect and gratitude for our shared environment and resources, if they demonstrated to students ways that they can make an impact, big or small, and empowered and encouraged students in the face of the climate crisis instead of being a part of the problem. For these reasons, we would like to ask you to commit to a sustainability resolution. And I will let another cause leader, Leslie Kim, explain this idea to you further. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia. Leslie Kim, you've been given permission to speak.
Would it be possible to reset time as new speaker? Thank you. Good evening, board members. My name is Leslie Kim, and I am a student at Ames High School. I'll be speaking as also a representative of Cause. Before I begin, I would like to thank the board for listening to and considering student voices. Cause is focused on educating and increasing awareness within our students about environmentalism and climate change as a nonpartisan science. It is through the CARE initiative, which stands for Composting and Recycling for the Environment, that our team is focused on making actionable changes by creating sustainable pathways in our school to mitigate the large amounts of waste that schools generate. On the first day of schools, teachers often go over classroom expectations. What is the expectations teachers have for students, and what is our responsibilities as students? Today, we have flipped the script and have brought our expectations to the school board through the ACSD sustainability resolution we are asking the school to adopt. This resolution, already adopted by the Iowa City School District, asks schools to make sustainability a priority and take an active role to reduce the emissions of harmful greenhouse gases by supporting initiatives for renewable energy sources and waste diversion. The entirety of this resolution has been emailed to all school board members, and we hope that you review it thoroughly and thoughtfully. While this resolution is just a start and flexible to discussion, it outlines the actions and attitudes that we request the school to take to combat the ongoing climate crisis. As an Ames high schooler, I am greatly appreciative of the school district and school board for empowering me as a student and allowing youth voices to be at the table. I hope that CAUSE and the Ames Community School District can produce productive dialogue to make agreements and compromises on the responsibilities we collectively have to the integrity of the environment around us and this earth. CAUSE leader Aurelia will close our ask of the school board.
Thank you, Leslie. Aurelia Kruger, you've been given permission to speak.
Hello. My name is Aurelia Kruger, and I am a student at Ames High School and a representative of CAUSE. We want to formally ask the Ames School Board to commit to a sustainability resolution, one that would help us fight against the climate crisis in Ames. We need to be taking steps to better our environment now before it's too late. Taking steps to make our community more sustainable so we can live with ourselves, knowing that we have done what we can do. We are empowered to make a difference here, now, for everyone, for future generations. Let's take a stand and start with our schools, in the world where we grew up, where we learned, made friends, made memories, and where we want the next generations to do the same, to empower them to make a change. So I invite and urge you to join us in this fight, for us, for our city, and for the children that we want to protect. We want to ask you to stand for everyone, to help us to commit to a sustainability resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurelia. All right, and we will then move on to our action items. And our first action item is our selection of search firm for new superintendent, and I will entertain a motion.
I move the board engage the services of Hassel Young Atea and Associates for the superintendent search for their response to the RFP.
I second.
Moved by Colton, seconded by Beerbaum. Discussion? So just as a little update to members of the public, we had a special meeting last week where we invited firms to interview. And so this is why we're having this as an action item tonight. Any other discussion? Moved by Colton, seconded by Beerbaum. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. And our next action item is our comprehensive assessment plan for 2021-2022.
I move that the board approve the 2021-22 comprehensive assessment plan as presented.
Second.
Moved by Franzen, seconded by Acker. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Mitchell Elementary additions change order number 9.
I move the board approve change order number 9 for the Mitchell Elementary additions and remodel project to Lane Construction Group in the amount of an additional $1,780.
Second. Moved by Franzen, seconded by Colton. Discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Board and staff items.
I just, I don't know, I think it was a work session that I rumbled and I said something about hearing stories, that I like to hear stories. And the students brought me stories. Hearing from the students and we want to know how they're doing, right? Like, how are our kids doing? And hearing students be passionate and telling us, wake up. This is serious. Thank you so much. And I guess my request, it would be like, how do we engage with them? I guess, I mean, you don't have to answer because it's not on the agenda, but I will be in support of bringing that discussion to the board so we can investigate and get the sustainability resolution going.
I'll just take some notes, and it seems like that could be on the board agenda setting the next time we meet.
Thank you. That'd be great. Thanks. Any other items from the board? And I did not note any staff requests this evening. Did anybody catch something I missed?
I'm wondering, just to be explicit about it, did the board also want to request us to consider bringing a discussion around the mask mandate?
Yes.
Things?
Yes. Okay, then items from the superintendent.
Sure, I only really have one, and it will be to end our meeting with this conversation and save you the work session this evening. You received in the materials, and they were out there for public review, conversation about moving a survey forward in our district to try to gather input around what is it that our community believes is that clear and compelling picture of the future they really care about. Having specifications from a broad brush of our community can be very helpful in bringing that vision into reality. So we've already had some conversation and background information as a board. Rather than consider that in a deeper way this evening, I would recommend that we go ahead and move forward with the survey so we can bring the data back and maybe let that data be the subject of our next work session. If they are drafts, and if anybody has some feedback or some input or some improvements or changes before that goes forward, I certainly would welcome that feedback. If not this evening, certainly would appreciate some emails or comments about that.
Is your current plan to take and have that survey through something like Thought Exchange so that the community members would be able to kind of build off each other and see what other people are thinking?
If you attend to that second sheet that's attached to the item, Director Beerbaum, it'd be twofold. One would be that open-ended survey that anyone could reply to alongside, yes, some listen and learn or some specific visitations to groups, trying to make sure that we are not inadvertently missing any groups in our community. So it'd be both paths.
And it seems that the questions on the survey that I saw here, there was a great deal of overlap with the kinds of questions that the superintendent search firm was going to be asking. Do you sort of envision these being complementary efforts?
I absolutely do. I think they will help inform each other. We may be able to move a little bit quicker in that process. I'm not certain. Now that we have a firm, I would certainly like to coordinate with HYA and make a decision together so that we are moving complementary as we go forward with these.
Great. Well, thank you for that update. And so then we will move to our board planning calendar. And our next meeting will be on September 27th. And we'll not have a work session at this time. And that'll be our next regular meeting, but we will also be looking at a special meeting this week. So you will be hearing from me about availability.
Then could we also start to, I know we'll do this, but HYA, try to get the meetings that we're going to need with them kind of scheduled and written in so that we make sure to get as many board members present as we can at all of those?
Yeah, that's a great point. In fact, I'll probably ask each of you to send me any dates that you know you're not available, since we know we'll have to be working around their schedules and trying to coordinate to have as many of us present as possible. Anything else on the board planning calendar? All right, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Beerbaum, seconded by Franzen. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Passes 6-0. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to everyone who spoke this evening. We appreciate your feedback. Have a great night.